Okay, I'd like to call the hearing of the Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and Related Agencies Subcommittee of Appropriations to order. This is our Member Day, where we take an opportunity to hear from members of the House of Representatives on their priorities. This is our second to last hearing, the last being in an hour from now, in which we'll have an opportunity to really fully absorb the input and feedback from our members before we begin to write our bill. This is really a vital hearing for us as appropriators. It gives us a chance to zero in on the issues that are important to our colleagues, particularly those that we wouldn't normally get to hear about but for their testimony. And so we're looking forward to hearing from each of our colleagues that have just asked to testify this morning. But before I begin, I'd like to ask Judge Carter if he has any opening remarks.
Well, this is one of the good ideas we've had here in Congress of us getting together with the members, and because in reality, as I've said to our conference many times, the Constitution reads that the Congress shall appropriate, and the more members of Congress participate in the appropriations process and learn the ins and outs and the goods and bads of appropriations, the better constitutionally they will be able to act. So I'm happy you're here, Mr. Dunn, and we're looking forward to hearing from you and hope to hear from lots of other folks.
Thank you, Judge Carter. And with that, we're joined this morning by my colleague from Florida, all of our colleagues, but my colleague from the Florida delegation, Congressman Dunn, who is here, who represents Florida's Panhandle, which, by the way, I will add, was devastated by Hurricane Michael, and is the only region of the country devastated by a natural disaster that has yet to be the beneficiary of a emergency supplemental. And yes, that is complete and total Florida bias. I have no shame in acknowledging that. This is a region that I've seen firsthand desperately needs our help, and I'm glad he's here to testify. He serves on the Committee on Veterans Affairs, Agriculture, and the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. Your full testimony will be entered into the record without objection, and you're recognized for 5 minutes to summarize your remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Wasserman Schultz, and thank you also for visiting our devastated district. I very much appreciate your presence there. Ranking Member Carter, thank you very much for your time, and esteemed members of the subcommittee. I'm here before you today to express my support for the President's fiscal year 20 budget request for $9 billion in emergency spending, particularly $2 billion designated for military construction projects at installations damaged in the 2018 hurricane season. As you know, my district was hit by Hurricane Michael on October 10, 2018. Florida's 2nd Congressional District is home to Tyndall Air Force Base, the Naval Support Activity Panama City, and the Coast Guard Station Panama City. All of these installations sustained terrible damages from the storm. But the most critical defense issue we face is the rebuild of Tyndall Air Force Base. Tyndall is in dire need of funding to begin a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar rebuild project. Tyndall Air Force Base was originally home to the largest F-22 presence in the world. Recently, the Air Force has announced its intention to bring 3 F-35 squadrons to Tyndall after the base is rebuilt. Tyndall's access to the Gulf Test Range makes it crucial to our nation's security and readiness. The Gulf Test Range allows for the testing and training of our next-generation fighter pilots, weapons, and cutting-edge technologies. This is the largest monitored testing range in the Allied world. To date, Tyndall has faced nearly 6 months without any emergency assistance from Congress. As a result, we are now facing a readiness crisis in the Air Force. But we can fix this. Time is of the essence, and I implore you to fulfill the President's promise for emergency funding to rebuild the bases affected by last year's hurricanes. I thank you for your time. I thank you for your thoughtful consideration, and I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Dunn. I don't have any questions, but I do want to express concern that since Michael hit Tyndall and your region and our country already faces a readiness challenge as a result of Tyndall essentially having 95% of its facilities completely, rendered nearly completely inoperable, adding the president's emergency declaration, which would rob $3.6 billion from our military construction funding that was already obligated, and that threatens to impact our next round of appropriations in this bill, isn't helpful to making sure that we can rebuild Tyndall. So I just think it's important to point that out. Mr. Carter?
Well, and when all this came down, Secretary of the Air Force came to visit me. I mean, very current event right after it happened. We go back to when she served in Congress. We were good friends, and we're going to have to completely rebuild Tyndall. That it is, and it's a good use of our money to rebuild Tyndall because it's going to be a premier launching platform for the our new fighter. It's good. So, and it needs. We need to get it done. It's going to take probably about 5 years to get it back in shape. 4 is what we're hoping for, but this is the government. That's my projection. Everybody's saying 4, but I'll give it 5 because I don't trust the government as quite as much as everybody else does around here. Whatever, we're going to be, but we will be flying planes as quickly as possible. So we're on top of this, and we will find a way.
I thank you for your time and your comments.
You're very welcome, and I'd like to associate myself with Judge Carter's remarks. Thank you for joining us.
Mr. Carbajal is going to be next.
Okay. Next, we'll be joined by the gentleman from California, the Honorable Salud Carbajal, who serves on the Armed Services, Agriculture, and the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And Congressman Carbajal is joining us this morning to discuss an issue important to his district related to the VA, outpatient clinics. Your full testimony will be entered into the record without objection, and you're welcome to be recognized for 5 minutes to summarize your testimony.
Well, not having done this before, I'm going to proceed to try to read it, or what do you recommend?
We're flexible, so
Okay, I'll
you have
try to-
5 minutes
Okay.
or so.
I'll proceed. Well, first of all, Chairwoman Wasserman Schultz and Ranking Member Carter, thank you for providing me this opportunity to, again, testify on now fiscal year 20 Veterans Affairs budget requests. I've had the honor of representing the 40,000 veterans living in the beautiful Central Coast, as you know, of California. And I'm here today to share with you some of the challenges that the veterans face day in and day out in my district, which I hope can again be addressed in the fiscal year 2020 appropriations bill. Last year I testified before your committee on Veterans Affairs, presenting the same challenges as I will today. The number one challenge for veterans in my district continues to be the VA phone system and their inability to be connected to their local Veterans Affairs community-based outpatient clinic, as you know, also known as C-Box, by phone. Currently, when veterans call the C-Box, they are routed to the greater Los Angeles healthcare system and end up waiting up to an hour before getting connected to a representative. Often they are unable to get through at all. I have personally had this experience where my call was never connected to an actual person and I just gave up. I tried this when the director of the greater Los Angeles area was actually visiting my district to demonstrate how ineffective the system was. This creates a major situation for veterans as they are unable to make or change medical appointments on the phone, requiring them to go to the clinic just to make an appointment. And for many veterans, the lack of accessibility deters them from pursuing the medical care that they need. The phone system must be changed in order to accommodate demand, whether it's having the local C-Box directly receive the call or increasing personnel at the major VA health systems so that veterans are not waiting on the phone for extended periods of time. Another challenge in my district for veterans, or that veterans face, is the lack of transportation access. I represent a very large district that spans hundreds of miles of the Central Coast. My district is not in close proximity to the VA hospital, the Greater Los Angeles VA hospital, and it can take veterans in my district approximately 5 to 7 hours to get to Los Angeles, depending on the traffic. And as I have testified before, the VA committee last year, there continues to be the only one bus serving my district. This one bus must make 6 stops before reaching the VA hospital in Los Angeles. Given the lack of other transportation options, this one bus route leaves a very short window of time available for veterans to access the health services they need. Between the time the bus finally arrives at the hospital and the time they must board the bus again to make it back home that night, in too many instances, veterans are either unable to fit all their appointments into one day or they miss their ride home. Last year, I offered a floor amendment increasing funding for the Veterans Transportation Program, VTP, in an effort to provide more transportation options for veterans. As you know, the VTP includes programs such as the Beneficiary Travel, Veterans Transportation Service, and the Highly Rural Transportation Grants. During the amendment debate, it was evident that veterans in my district were being impacted, or should I say veterans in many districts were being impacted by the lack of transportation options. With this committee's support, especially the support of then Ranking Member Wasserman Schultz and then Chairman Dent, we were able to pass the amendment with bipartisan support and include the additional funding in the House bill. Unfortunately, the increased funding was not included in the conference report. So I am here today to once again ask for the support of this committee in providing increased funding for the Veterans Transportation Program, as it will benefit veterans across the country in seeking the health care they need and deserve.
Wonderful.
Sorry for being so formal.
Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. We, as you referenced in your testimony, we put language, this has been an ongoing concern, and rightfully so, and we put language in our bill last fiscal year, FY19, to try to address this and press the VA to address the communications issue. Has there been any improvement since that language was added?
No, not at all.
Okay. Well, that's troubling. We need to get to the did they not act on our direction?
I think there was I don't believe so. I recently met with the VA staff and didn't get the answers that I was hoping to get.
Remind me, I'm sorry.
The language that has to route the calls from, if they call a CBOC, to go to a CBOC and go to a VA medical center.
I see that's closer to. So has that, sorry, I asked staff off the mic. The language specifically directed them, the VA, to route the calls from your CBOC to another CBOC, which would obviously be closer and smaller and more responsive, potentially. Has that not happened?
That has not happened.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll follow up on that for sure.
Okay.
Judge Carter?
I'm going to show my ignorance. Explain to me how this phone system works.
Well, you know, when you call for an appointment, oftentimes, if not most of the time, you're routed to the Los Angeles Greater Los Angeles intake system. And sometimes getting
So
through.
is this internal to the VA?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. You're a veteran. You call trying to make an appointment in your community, but instead of going to your clinic, you're sent
Yeah, I
to
got
the
you.
nearest
Okay, now I
hospital.
figured it out.
Yeah,
So it's an internal phone system to the VA?
yes.
And why can't they fix this? I mean,
Well, it's,
if you
there
got.
should be a logical,
You got a phone
easy
system that
fix.
services your VA. Why can't you call your VA? Is that it?
Yes, that's the bottom line.
That's real.
Either they need more staffing, they need a better system, something, but it's very cumbersome and it's not effective. And if I was to call them in front of you right now, you would see how ineffective.
Well, being a
the system-
person who hates to wait on things like that, who curses those kinds of phone systems, I would go nuts if that happened to me. So I can very much understand the frustration of the veterans. We've stopped having human contact, and that's why we don't get good service. Well, I'm all for trying to figure out a way to build a fire under these people to fix that.
Thank you, Representative Carter. I wanted to make a point when the director came to visit my district at my request, and she was telling me how the system had been improved, and I got out my cell phone, and I said, well, let me show you how improved
It
the
is.
system is, and I think I waited 20 minutes or 25 minutes before,
Oh, my
and
God.
I didn't make contact with anyone, so I just hung up.
Oh, my gosh. So you have my sympathy, and I'm on your team. Let's
you.
fix it.
Thank you.
And I don't know how, but maybe we talk to the big boys and say, one of you guys got to get serious down there. You're going to have somebody, you know, these guys, these veterans, they've got a lot of emotional issues that could cause them to do
Would the gentleman yield?
crazy things.
How difficult is it to just let them call their CBOC and have real people answer the phone for them?
And phone systems don't cost that much.
5 to 7 hour drive away.
Yeah,
You should
ridiculous.
not be having to go into a queue for Los Angeles.
No.
If you're in Congressman Carbajal's
Oh,
district. So
you've got legitimate gripes.
So we're gonna,
Thank you.
And is this a regular bus service that runs back and forth? Or is this the public bus?
It is, and it's volunteer-driven,
Oh, okay,
so which makes it even more challenging.
yeah.
so we usually try escalating messaging in the report that we provide when we have concerns, and so there wasn't an express direction in the language last fiscal year, and so we'll
Thank you.
ratchet it up.
Thank
Well,
you.
Chairwoman, I suggest we escalate this. This
Oh,
is
yes.
ridiculous.
Yes, and we will.
To think that you would wait 20 minutes, not get a response, drive 7 hours, and find out you don't have an appointment,
It's unacceptable.
I don't think I'd be any madder than a wet hen, for sure.
Well, what's worse is you get there, and because it took you so long to get to Los Angeles for your appointment, then you only have a window of an hour or two. Then you got to go back, and if you have to add an appointment or change an appointment, you're really,
We have, now, Texas has that issue, too. We do have that issue. The guys out west, they got to travel a long way to get to a hospital, and they got a short window,
Yeah.
and that's unfortunate, too.
Yeah. Well, thank you,
great.
Congressman.
Thank you.
We'll definitely work with you on addressing this.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you for the opportunity to come
Thanks
before you.
for continuing to keep it in front of us.
Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you. Next, we will, I'm sorry? Oh, no, I saw, no, he's not. He was there.
Hey, good morning.
Did you take him out?
Yes, they told us he was not coming.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, good to see you.
Good morning. Good morning. This morning, our next member is the Honorable Gregorio Sablan from the territory of the Northern Mariana Islands, and he's been a longtime colleague of ours and a fierce advocate for his island's veterans, and we look forward to hearing his testimony. Your testimony will be, your full testimony will be entered into the record, and you're recognized for 5 minutes to summarize your remarks.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Wasserman Schultz, Ranking Member Carter, Congressman Case. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on the needs of our veterans in the Northern Mariana Islands. I have my written testimony. When I first got into Congress, one of the first things I did was go to Hawaii and ask the Spark Masnaga Center to dust off a contract for a clinician on Saipan. So they did that. So we've had the doctor providing services for 10 years now. She provides service 2 days a week, and then another doctor does it on the Saturday mornings. And we have an admin staff handling appointments, of course, and then now it took me 2 years to get a licensed clinical social worker on board. But, our men and women served in the same wars as everyone else. Actually, I have an uncle who was a prisoner of war in the Korean War. It doesn't really reflect because they're either recruited on Guam or somewhere else in the country. But, you know, our veterans serve in the same conflicts. My son-in-law got wounded in Operation Anaconda, you know, but he can't come home because we don't have the services on Saipan that he needs. His physical wounds are fixed, but his PTSD wounds, he's still going on. So to this day, our veterans do not have access to, you know, basic VA services and benefits. We're the only jurisdiction without a full-time CBOC staffed by VA healthcare providers. And a recent VA study concluded there were not enough Marianas veterans enrolled in VA service to warrant a CBOC. Our state Veterans and Military Office say that they do have about 2,000 plus veterans on their list. However, we only have 400 plus, less than 500 who were signed up for VA services. Our veterans are uniquely isolated and lack the healthcare options available with veterans in other areas. And the lack of facility and staff denies them, their families, access to benefits such as VA caregiver support services and programs for homeless veterans that require direct administration by VA Health and Facility. We're the only ones also without even a vet center. So Marianas veterans do not have access to the full range of readjustment counseling and other help for themselves and their families to transition successfully to civilian life. We do not even have a VA benefits office to go to when they need help with their services they've earned. So many of them never get those services at all. And of course, you know, many of you may have small towns in your districts for the VA clinic or a vet center or a vet benefits, but here is the difference. In the Marianas, we cannot get in the car and drive to the VA. We have to fly to, say, Spark Matsunaga Center in Hawaii, Tripper, or maybe the Guam CBOC to access VA care services. I know some of our veterans who fly to Palo Alto, San Francisco for specialized medicine. So they, you know, they must pay hundreds of dollars for plane ticket and hotel accommodations, or they wait months until someone from VA parachutes in for a few hours and then are gone. There used to be a way for members of Congress to address disparities of this kind by directing funds to solve the problem. Unfortunately, after my first year here, we gave that authority away basically to the bureaucracy and the administration and appropriating money. So I became a member of the VA committee for last Congress and this Congress on a waiver, just to get these issues the attention they deserve. I'm asking for some help for my veterans. My goodness, they deserve nothing less than other veterans who serve in units. I joined the Army before I became a citizen. I became a citizen 2 months before I got out of service. I can take you to the memorial wall and point the names of our citizens who died in Vietnam as well. So anyway, my 5 minutes is up. I need help. I hope that this year is a good year for us to get those help. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Carter,
you.
Mr. Case, and all of you.
Thank you, Congressman Sablan.
Appreciate
and
it.
You're right that we previously had a more direct way to be able to address this issue, and I know that I am committed to make sure that there is no place in the country that are treated like second-class citizens, and that every veteran should have access, you know, near their residence in order to access healthcare services. And so I'm committed to trying to find a way to do that, even without the directed spending option that we previously had. Judge Carter?
Well, my friend, I know what a good man you are, and what would you, if you had your perfect world, what would you want us to put there? A clinic?
CBOC, sir.
CBOC.
Yes, sir.
And how many veterans you have 400 that you think are pretty active,
We have 400.
but there are 2,000 that could, if encouraged,
And
be.
more so, sir, we have hundreds who live outside of the Northern Marianas, like my son-in-law who lives in Oregon, Portland, Oregon, because he has emotional mental problems. He can't come home. My daughter was just home. I said, look, I've got this piece of land. I'll give it to you to build a house, but is Bill ready to come here? Because we don't have the services for Bill. Bill is working in Oregon. He gets to see his doctors there. And there are many more. My first cousin moved to Florida, one because his wife had a relative there also. But he already decided that he needed to move to the States because he needed VA services that was not available.
Yeah.
And he was a veteran, so there's many.
Well, I
many like
would,
that.
let's at least do some solid language on this and try to get something done. This is a great member of Congress right here. And I wish we had earmarks too.
Yeah, we all do. Congressman Case?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Congressman. I just want to associate myself with your remarks, especially also coming from the Pacific. And to amplify the concerns that you've expressed, I would read into the record that the distance from Honolulu to Saipan is, I think, 3,700 miles.
Yeah, about 7 hours plus a layover of another 7 hours on Guam before you catch the one flight a day to Saipan.
Right. So you can go from here to San Francisco. That's 2,500. 2,500 to Honolulu, where we do have, obviously, veterans facilities, and another 3,700 to our veterans in Saipan and Guam. And by the way, Samoa, disproportionate number of veterans there, 2,600 miles. So this is the kind of distances that we are talking about. And if you had listened into the hearings of this subcommittee over the last couple of months, you'd know that we are all very, very focused on ways to shrink the distances to reach our veterans in perhaps novel and different ways using technology. Besides the CBOX, which I completely understand, do you have any other suggestions on funding of things like telehealth or?
We do have telehealth, although some veterans are not happy with talking to a TV. I said, look, it's what we have. Make use of it until we could improve. If I may add a vet center, maybe probably possible, because we do have with Secretary Shukin's promise that he kept his promise. So vet center staff from Guam do come to Saipan, to the Marianas, the 3 separate islands, on a more regular basis now. And the only thing that we lack is a room that they use exclusively for that. Secretary Shukin asked me to see if where the clinic is, if there's another room there that they could use. I went that far, but then, of course, he lost his job, so we never finished the effort. But no, a vet center would be my second option.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Congressman Sablan, and we will diligently work with you on continuing to address this lack of access. You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you. Next, we have Congressman Anthony Brindisi from the great state of New York, my original home state, and yes, I'm a native New Yorker. He serves on the Committee on Veterans Affairs and the Committee on Agriculture, and has a couple of issues that he wants to discuss with the subcommittee this morning. Your full testimony will be entered into the record, and you are recognized for 5 minutes to summarize your remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you, Ranking Member Carter, for the opportunity to testify today as you work to prepare the fiscal year 2020 appropriations bill. I wanted to share with you some of the priorities of the district that I represent in upstate New York. And I know your subcommittee receives a number of requests every year, so your consideration is greatly appreciated. First, I'd like to urge the committee to fully support the anti-terrorism perimeter security / entry control point military construction project at the Air Force Research Laboratory in Rome, New York. I'm thankful that the committee recognized this project's importance by including the full $14.2 million for the project in its fiscal year 2019 appropriations. However, the Trump administration's plan to redirect military construction funding toward the construction of a border wall places this important project at risk for being delayed or canceled altogether. Rome Lab conducts extremely sensitive research and development projects, including cutting-edge cyber, quantum computing, and counter-UAS research. The sensitive work done at the lab places it at a higher risk, and ensuring these funds are appropriated will help directly ensure the safety of thousands of employees and contractors who visit the lab every day and help work to stop potential terrorist threats. I urge the committee to protect the funding for Rome Lab's perimeter security MILCON project. Second, I urge the committee to include my requested language regarding a clinic in my district. The Albany VA Medical Center has proposed to move the Bainbridge CBOC in Oneonta, New York, to Oneonta, New York, in neighboring Otsego County. The Bainbridge Clinic's lease has been extended until 2020. Bainbridge and surrounding Shenango County are extremely rural, transportation and healthcare options are limited, and the population is aging. Over 3,600 veterans reside in Shenango County, and any potential move of the CBOC out of the Bainbridge area would have a tremendous impact on veterans and their families in having access to VA healthcare. As you know, the VA Mission Act requires that the VA perform market area assessments regarding their healthcare. Market area assessment shall include an assessment of the demand for healthcare in specific areas, healthcare provider capacity at each facility, and the capacity of community care networks to provide care. The Albany VA plans to conduct a market assessment in 2020. Given the recent passage of the Mission Act, I believe that the VA must perform this assessment first in order to inform any decision to move clinics. I respectfully request that the committee include my proposed language in the bill to ensure that VA is considering all the data and assessments available to them before making the decision. Including this language will ensure that any decision to move the CBOC will be based on an objective assessment, resulting in better access to care for veterans in the area. I want to thank you for your consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Congressman Brindisi. Just a quick question. Is there any, has the process been started to move the CBOC, or is it just proposed?
So it's being proposed at this point in time. They are in the process of looking for new sites at the new location. My contention is, and I met with folks from the VA and asked them, why would you make this move without doing the market assessment first? And really did not have a good response to that.
Good question. Okay. That's important that you brought this to our attention before we start writing the bill. Thank you.
You got it.
Judge Carter?
Yeah, that's a good question, and a logical thing to do. The Air Force Base project.
Yes.
What's the status of it today? Is it under construction?
It's not under construction yet. It's in design phase right now. They hope to get it under construction later on this year, hopefully. But of course, with this new potential threat, that is all delayed.
I understand that, and we all have to look at our projects that way. It's just in the design phase right now.
Correct.
Well, then it potentially is at risk.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on that.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We will keep an eye on it, but at least as of right now, what we've been, based on the criteria that has sort of been shifting and not been very transparent, at our hearing where we had the installation secretary with us from DOD, he indicated that they would not be utilizing any project that has funds unobligated prior to the end of FY19, and this project is in that category.
Okay.
So under the criteria they appear to be using at the moment, this project would not be targeted for the wall funding.
Okay.
But we will keep an eye on it, for
Okay.
sure.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Okay. Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you very much
Thank you
for your
very much.
testimony.
Absolutely.
Next, would like to recognize Congressman Cisneros from the great state of California. New Hampshire. He serves on the Armed Services Committee and the Veterans Affairs Committee, and has submitted testimony to address a concern he has over the need for a veteran cemetery in his congressional district, and we appreciate the opportunity to hear from you, and like all the other members, your full testimony will be entered into the record without objection, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Chairwoman Wasserman Schultz, Ranking Member Carter, and members of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and related agencies, thank you for allowing me this opportunity to provide input on the fiscal year 2020 appropriations process on behalf of the residents of California's 39th Congressional District. As a Navy veteran with the honor of representing over 25,000 veterans, the programs under your jurisdiction are important to me, our veterans and their families. I would like to take this opportunity to highlight just a few examples of the top priorities for my district. First, I urge you to provide increased funding for the Veteran State Cemetery Grant Program in order to support a veteran cemetery in Orange County, California. Orange County has a disproportionately high population of veterans. However, there is no cemetery in the county. The area traffic makes the travel time to the closest national cemetery over 2 hours. Local entities have been pursuing a state veteran cemetery. In order to make this happen, federal funding would need to be made available in order to get the project over the finish line. This is why I urge you to increase the VA State Cemetery Grant Program funding to ensure this long overdue project does not suffer any further delays. I urge the committee to continue to support the Vet Success on Campus program, VSOC. I've heard from many constituents who have benefited from the VSOC program at Mount Centennial College in Walnut, California, as they transition from military service to academic life. VSOC counselors understand the unique challenges that face veteran students and are able to quickly resolve problems that our veteran students face. Increased funding will allow this valuable program to reach more veteran students by extending to additional campuses. Finally, I want to thank the Chairwoman Wasserman Schultz, for your steadfast commitment to opposing military construction funding being diverted to build a wall on the southern border. The consequences of this strategy are particularly stark in my region. The 146th Airlift Wing at the Air National Guard Station at Channel Island in Southern California is often called upon to help fight wildfires. To enhance their training and readiness to carry out critical search and rescue and wildlife suppression missions, the 146th is soon expecting an $8 million for a flight simulator program. But timely funding of this program is now in doubt. Diverting funds to address real emergencies like wildfires and search and rescue missions in order to pay for a border wall would be a gross injustice. The Los Alamitos Army Airfield near my district desperately needs sustainment and maintenance dollars. The airfield has the longest runway in Orange County and a full-time base population of over 800. As a command headquarters for California's Office of Emergency Services, it is a logistical hub for disaster response for Southern California. But the facility has major unmet maintenance needs, including pavement, degradation of the runway and taxiways, and airfield lighting outages. It would be unconscious if we can't get emergency supplies where they're needed to go because of unavailable funds for basic maintenance and upkeep. Nationwide, there is a demonstrated need for increased resources for military construction projects, not cuts, and unauthorized wall funding should not exacerbate these problems. Thank you for your time and consideration. I know you have a tough job ahead of you, but I hope you will keep these stories in mind as you craft your fiscal year 2020 Appropriations Act for military construction, Veterans Affairs, and related agencies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman Cisneros. A dear friend of all of ours that are veteran appropriators is former Congressman Sam Farr, who sat on this committee for many years and was a champion of this very same cemetery that you have raised in your testimony. My only question is are there state matching dollars that have been appropriated by California?
So yeah, so the state has already approved like over $1 million to kind of do some environmental, the environmental justifications, everything that needs to be done. And so I've talked to both the veterans of California there at the state level to see they want to help the veterans there in Orange County. They want to participate. They want to make it happen. So
Good, because it's already a slow process, and having state matching dollars is helpful to know. Thank you. Judge Carter, nothing? Mr. Case? Thank you so much, and we look forward to working with you as we move forward on writing the bill.
all right, thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Congressman Glenn Thompson. from the great state of Pennsylvania, and he serves on the Committee on Agriculture and Education and the Workforce Committee, and he is here today to talk about his concern over the Ordnance Barracks Army Medical Center in Germany and the natural gas supplier there. So your full testimony will be entered into the record without objection, and you're recognized to summarize your remarks in 5 minutes.
Promotion left for Sergeant First Class. We're real proud of them. Now up at Fort Drum. You know, what you do is so important because, you know, you're taking care of these men and women, American heroes, while they're serving through military construction and, quite frankly, with Veterans Affairs after they served. So there is an issue that has certainly come to my attention that I wanted to raise here, and it really had to do specifically with Madam Chair, as you referenced, the Army Corps of Engineers worked to construct the Rhine Ordnance Barracks Army Medical Center in Germany, and I support the need for that construction. It's going to really save lives because it's going to reduce the commute of when soldiers are flown in to the Air Force Base. A much shorter commute. The turnaround will be amazing. But it's just my concern was just one specific logistical issue. Obviously, this new hospital is being constructed in Kaiserslautern, Germany, and we'll do a great job of serving our troops from all over. They come there for surgery and rehabilitation, you know, and it will. So let me just get right to the heart of my concern, and is not with this hospital. I fully support that construction continue to go forward. I led a congressional delegation there right before Thanksgiving. We toured the site. They're doing an outstanding job. What I see as a concern, my concern is the vulnerabilities of its potential reliance on Russian-sourced natural gas. According to the Energy Information Administration, Germany imported 40% of its natural gas supplies from Russia in 2015, and this percentage has only increased since. And just last year, Germany bought more natural gas from Gazprom, Russia's state-owned gas company, than any other nation. Now, considering Russia's willingness to use its energy exports as a political tool in the past, we really need to ensure that our military installations, that the power source is not turned off, especially in the middle of a cold winter there. So as a result of Germany's increased reliance on Russian natural gas, Congress did include language in both the fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 19 National Defense Authorization Act that limits Russia's influence over our military bases in Europe. And in fact, the fiscal year 2018 NDAA called on the Department of Defense to limit the use of Russian-sourced energy at military facilities in Europe as much as possible. Unfortunately, the Army Corps is working in direct contravention in a contradictive way of these laws. It's planning the construction of an on-site cogeneration plant that will only use natural gas to produce the hospital's electricity and hot water backups. This is a break from what we've always done in the past of purchasing from the city of Kaiserslautern, who use a kind of a community heating steam type format. It's contradictory to congressional intent and illogical. It's a costly path forward. The Army Corps insists on moving forward with this single source plant despite Congress's previous actions calling for a mixed fuel energy source. So it's also an illogical approach to ensuring energy security for the hospital. The Army Corps is planning on using Russian-sourced natural gas as a redundancy for disruptions in Europe's natural gas supply. And these disruptions, however, are most likely to be caused by Russia's unwillingness to shut off gas supplies to Western Europe. This is an irrational approach to energy security and poses a major threat to the American troops serving in the 3 areas of responsibility that the hospital will serve. And I respectfully request that the committee's consideration, including language in the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Appropriation Bill that limits funds for the construction of ROBMC's on-site cogeneration plant, not the rest of the hospital. I want to be clear about that. As a father of a son soldier who had surgery after being wounded with an IED in Iraq, I have nothing but the utmost respect for our professionals that are working there and the need for that facility. And to do so, the language would limit those funds until the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers can certify that it's in compliance with U.S. statute. And thanks again for the opportunity to come and just present those concerns to the committee.
Thank you, Congressman Thompson. I actually just had an opportunity over the March recess week to travel to Central and Eastern Europe with Senator Crapo and other Republican. I was the only Democrat that went. Other Republican U.S. senators and Congressman Fulcher. And Nord Stream 2, which is the Russia's natural gas pipeline to which you're referring, was the major focus of our discussions, and it is deeply concerning, and you're absolutely right that there is tremendous risk that we believe as a nation that Germany and some of our allies are taking. So I'd like to discuss this with you as we move forward, because I think that any way that we can really put obstacles in Russia's way of being able to sabotage our allies and the United States' national security interests as they move forward with this is it's going to be important and critical. We just also have to make sure that we don't affect the operations of the hospital in the process.
Well, when we were there, it was, I mean, nothing was under construction. They were just clearing the ground. So it's very early in the process. And we know that for a fact that our experience is that Russia will weaponize energy. And so it's, I really appreciate your interest. We'd be glad to forward at least a starting point to the subcommittee, some language that we've worked on.
That would be very helpful. Thank you. Judge Carter?
Thank you. Ask the Ukrainians if you want to know about weaponizing energy. I share your concerns completely, and I think we ought to at least have a discussion about putting language in the bill about this. Now, I am familiar with that kind of heat. My wife's got relatives in Germany, and is it adequate? I mean, is the city able to supply the power they need?
It is serving our base today and all the communities. It's somewhat, and I didn't address this in my remarks because it seemed kind of outside the scope, but it also kind of breaks with the trust that we have developed with the Kaiserslautern community and Germany. You know, as we've downsized our troops, we've reduced our interaction. That's impacting our relationships and our communities. And I understand that. That's kind of a natural evolution, but this seems like also just an unnecessary break in the trust with.
And I don't know. I've never what their system is, but in Oberhausen, they use garbage to produce the heat for the steam. It's a very environmentally well-designed system they've got over there, using waste to make fire, to make steam, to make power. Which is pretty.
Our delegation, which was a strong bipartisan delegation, did actually tour the Kaiserslautern power plant. It just shows you how easy we're entertained. But that was it was an important part of our stop, and we saw. Yes, there is some natural gas, but they have their own solar fields. They have woody biomass. They have coal. They win. So it's a very diverse
they're
sources.
doing a good job on that.
Yeah, and they fluctuate based on availability and cost. So.
Well, I don't like the Russians supplying gas, and I think we ought to go over there and compete with LPG myself. But that's a different story.
Thank you very much,
Thank you
Congressman Thompson. We appreciate your testimony. Last but not least, Congressman Dan Kildee from the great state of Michigan, who serves on the Ways and Means Committee and is going to be talking to us about his concerns at Wart Smith Air Force Base regarding the cleanup of PFAS and PFOA foam.
Thank you so much.
You're recognized.
Pardon the formality.
Sorry. We'll enter your full testimony into the record without objection, and you're recognized to summarize them for 5 minutes.
There, how's that? Is that better? In any event, these PFAS chemicals are a class of man-made chemicals that have been used for decades on military bases and in consumer products. Chemicals are very effective at being fire, grease, and water resistant, and have been used in a wide range of products, including firefighting foam particularly, but also Teflon, food packaging, and clothing. And while they're effective, studies show PFAS chemicals pose significant health issues in people, including cancer, thyroid disease, pregnancy complications. In addition, these chemicals build up in people's bodies and are toxic even at very small levels. In fact, the EPA's safe level of exposure for two types of PFAS, PFOA and PFOS, is 70 parts per trillion. To put that in perspective, that's just a few drops in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So these chemicals are quite toxic and a serious health threat. The two primary sources of PFAS chemicals are industrial sites where consumer products are made, and the second, which I'll focus on today, is firefighting foam at military installations across the country. So I represent Oscoda, Michigan, which is a small rural community that's home to the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base, which at one time was home to part of the SAC B-52 fleet. The veterans who worked at Wurtsmith were exposed to PFAS in firefighting foam. But also nearby Oscoda residents have been affected since PFAS chemicals used on the base have leached into the nearby groundwater and private drinking water wells. So sadly, despite the DOD knowing about this situation at Wurtsmith since 2009, it has not acted quickly enough to stop contamination coming from the former base. And as a result, PFAS continues to leach into the ground and surface water in Oscoda that people use for drinking. According to the GAO, Wurtsmith is one of just one of 401 military sites identified as having known a potential PFAS after decades of firefighting foam used by the military. So all over the country, community residents, service members, and their families are increasingly fearful of exposure to PFAS chemicals. Each week, members from across the country tell me about their constituents who want greater action on this very important issue. Last Congress, working with you, Madam Chair, we were able to see some progress on this in the Milcon VA budget, where we saw $14 million allocated for cleanup of PFAS on BRAC bases. That was the first time there was a specific allocation to fund PFAS chemical cleanup at BRAC bases like Wurtsmith. In addition, outside this subcommittee, there was $134 million allocated for active military bases. Ultimately, even when combined, this represents only a small fraction of the resources that will be needed to clean up hundreds of PFAS-contaminated sites, and yet the DOD has not requested additional funds. According to the GAO, of the 401 sites the military identified as having PFAS contamination, the Defense Department has only acted at 32 to clean up contamination. That's less than 10% of all the identified sites. So clearly, the GAO study shows that this is not only impacting my district, but lots of districts all around the country. It's my belief that the department in particular has failed to act with the required urgency to address this growing public health and environmental crisis. During a recent oversight and reform hearing on PFAS, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense for Environment, Safety, and Occupational Health, Maureen Sullivan, testified that it will cost more than $2 billion to clean up PFAS contamination around military bases. Yet, the President's budget this year does not reflect anywhere near that amount. In fact, for BRAC bases, there's no increase suggested at all. So since the Department and this administration has not yet acted, Congress must. So I'm asking the subcommittee to prioritize funding to clean up PFAS at BRAC bases like Wurtsmith during FY20. I really appreciate your efforts on this. I know this is a really significant issue. We're not anywhere close to the $2 billion that we think we need, but we've got to make some greater progress. $14 million a year isn't going to do it. I'm working on this with Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick, who co-chairs the PFAS task force with me. It's been a bipartisan effort from the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman Kildee. In addition to it being a $2 billion problem, there's 401 sites that need some kind of cleanup. Obviously, $14 million doesn't begin to address the needs, and when it leaches into the drinking water supply, then obviously we're going beyond just impacting our veterans, and both are unacceptable.
Right.
So we'll continue to work with you on this.
Thank you.
Judge Carter?
Dan, this is a dumb question. How do they clean it up? You know,
They pump and treat it. There's
other chemicals come in
emerging
and
technology.
neutralize it, or what?
Yeah, I mean, actually using granule activated carbon, GAC, I just go by the acronym, through a pump and treat process.
They filter it out.
Pull out the PFAS, run it through, and then release the groundwater back
Just
in.
didn't know, to be honest with you.
It's expensive.
You know, I've heard Sam Fart, you mentioned earlier, talk about all the cleanups that we're negligently behind on cleanups
Right.
that are historic, that go back to World War II.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, it's been, what, a decade now that we've known how dangerous, or a little more than that we've known how dangerous this is.
We still use it?
We still use it. In fact, just recently, in last year's FAA reauthorization, we were able to get an amendment that allows private airports to not use PFAS-laden firefighting foam, but it is essentially the industry standard, and a lot of this really is going into the ground through firefighting foam. We've advocated at least a protocol that would eliminate the use of PFAS, AFFF, for training purposes.
Yeah.
Problem is, it's really effective.
Really works, yeah.
It really works. It's quick, but there's been no incentive for the market to devise alternatives when this is essentially the required material.
It's a challenging, we'll certainly
Thank you.
try.
Thank you, Congressman
right,
Kildee.
thank you.
Appreciate your advocacy.
You bet.
Now, that concludes this morning's Member Day hearing. I want to thank all the members who took time out of their busy day to come and testify and bring issues that are of concern to all of us to our attention. And now we will call to order the Public Witness Day hearing, which is the Subcommittee's last scheduled hearing. If I can ask the witnesses to join us at the table, I cannot think of a better way to close out our hearings than by hearing from the veteran service organizations. This morning, we welcome Ms. Heather L. Ansley, Associate Executive Director of Government Relations at the Paralyzed Veterans of America, Ms. Joy J. Ilam, National Legislative Director for the Disabled Veterans of America, and Mr. Patrick D. Murray, Deputy Director of the National Legislative Service for the Veterans of Foreign Wars. Today's witnesses work tirelessly to assist our veterans daily as they navigate the too often cumbersome VA system, the transition to civilian life, and the physical, emotional, psychological, and financial challenges that our veterans face upon returning home. To best identify the needs of our veterans, it is essential that we hear from them and partner with those who know them best, our VSOs. While the VA has made great strides in recent years, we know our work is far from done. I want to thank you all for joining us today. I look forward to your testimony and continuing this productive dialogue. Before I begin, we would love to hear from Judge Carter.
Glad to have you here. We're looking forward to hear from you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Without objection, all of your written statements will be entered into the record. Please feel free to summarize, please summarize your remarks, let me be more affirmative, in 5 minutes or less. And Ms. Ansley, you're recognized for 5 minutes to begin.
Thank you. Chairwoman Wasserman Schultz, Ranking Member Carter, and members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the co-authors of the independent budget, Disabled American Veterans, Paralyzed Veterans of America, and Veterans of Foreign Wars, I would like to thank you for the opportunity for us to testify today regarding the IB's views on funding requirements for the Department of Veterans Affairs for fiscal year 2020 and the advanced appropriations for fiscal year 2021. This morning, Ms. Elam, Mr. Murray, and I will discuss the IB's specific recommendations for veterans' health care, benefits, construction, and other related needs. For more than 30 years, we have presented the IB's budget and policy recommendations to Congress and the administration. We recognize the immense pressure to reduce federal spending. However, we believe that the ever-growing demand for veterans' health care and benefits, particularly with more health care being provided in the community purchased by VA, validates the continued need for increased VA funding. This February, the IB released comprehensive VA budget recommendations for all the discretionary programs for FY 2020, as well as the advanced appropriation for the medical care accounts for FY 2021. The recommendations also include funding to implement the VA Mission Act and other reform efforts. In FY 2020, we recommend a total of $103.3 billion to ensure that the VA is able to fully and faithfully implement the VA Mission Act, make needed improvements throughout the VA, and is able to timely deliver benefits and services to all of our ill and injured veterans, their families, and survivors. The VA Mission Act, which changes how VA provides health services for veterans in the community, is projected to increase veterans' enrollment in the VA healthcare system itself and increase veterans' utilization and reliance on VA as a direct provider of that care. We appreciate that Congress has remained committed to our nation's veterans and has continued to provide increases in appropriations dollars. However, the serious access problems in the healthcare system that were identified in 2014 and the ultimate passage of the VA Mission Act last year have created a financial obligation absent sufficient resources to fully and faithfully enact the law that we're afraid could erode efforts to reform and modernize the VA healthcare system. Notably, implementing the VA Mission Act this fiscal year will require more resources than have been provided and is the main reason why medical care appropriations for fiscal years 2020 and 21 need to be increased. The administration's FY 2020 request of $84 billion for medical care is $4 billion less than the IB estimates is going to be necessary to fully meet the demands by veterans for health care during the fiscal year. For FY 2020, the IB recommends approximately $88.1 billion in total medical care funding and $90.8 billion for FY 2021. This recommendation reflects the necessary adjustments to the baseline for all medical care program funding in the preceding fiscal year and assumes that the new Veterans Community Care Program is fully operational at the start of FY 2020. It should be noted, however, that our recommendations do not include the additional cost of VA's proposed access standards for new community care program that were published for public comment on February 22nd. Of the $88 billion that IB recommends for FY 2020, $70 billion of that is to fund VA-provided medical care, which is a $3.5 billion increase over this fiscal year, and $18 billion for medical care community care funding, which is nearly double the current amount. Of the $70 billion in VA funding recommended for FY 2020, the IB included $56.1 billion for VA medical services. This recommendation is a reflection of multiple components, including the current services estimate, the increase in patient workload, and additional medical care program costs, but it does exclude anticipated receipts from VA's Medical Care Collections Fund. The administration's request for VA medical services of $51.4 billion is approximately $4.7 billion below that of the IB's request. Although the administration's request reflects an apparent increase of 3%, the IB believes that when taking into account the increased cost to maintain the current services and anticipated increases in workload, as well as increased cost inside VA due to the Mission Act, that apparent increase will lead to a shortfall. For medical care, community care, as I said, we recommend $18.1 billion for 2020, which includes the growth in current services, estimated spending under the Choice Program, and additional obligations under the VA Mission Act. Lastly, we recommend $840 million for medical and prosthetic research to ensure that VA can continue the advances and treatments that would be available to injured and ill veterans in the future, one of their core mission areas. I would like to now turn to Ms. Elam, who will continue with the IB's comments on VA's FY 2020 budget.
Thank you. And Ms. Elam, your full testimony will be entered into the record, and you're recognized for 5 minutes to summarize your remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Chairwoman Wasserman-Schultz and members of the subcommittee. The IB believes there are additional medical program funding needs for VA and have recommended $1.2 billion for several important initiatives, to include increased funding for VA's long-term care services, comprehensive caregiver program, women veterans health program, reproductive services, prosthetics and sensory aids, and information technology. Each year, VA's long-term care services help millions of veterans maintain their dignity and quality of life. The IB recommends $533 million to meet increasing demand for these essential services. There has been significant growth among veterans with age-related daily living and independent living deficits who will require VA medical care support services to remain in their homes. While we expect some growth in the need for long-term care in institutional setting and shorter rehabilitative care stays, there is a shortfall in resources for home and community-based care services and a continued need to properly balance funds to meet aging veterans' increased demand for these services, which would help avoid care in more costly inpatient settings. To support VA's caregivers of our nation's severely injured veterans, we recommend $253 million for expansion of VA's comprehensive caregiver program, $100 million more than the administration's request. This recommendation is based on the Congressional Budget Office estimate for preparing the program, including increased staffing levels and IT needs, and the rollout of the first phase of the program scheduled for FY 2020. Another population often overlooked is our nation's women veterans. The independent budget recommends $76 million for VA's Women Veterans Health Program to account for steady growth in this population using VA services, which increased by 175% between 2000 and 2015. This additional funding will allow VA to hire 200 new physicians, train 700 designated women's health providers through its mini-residency clinical training program, hire additional clinical and administrative support positions, including nurses, women veterans program managers, care coordinators, and clerks. Also hiring 100 new women veteran peer support specialists and expanding the women's-only therapeutic retreats and child care pilot programs. The IB also recommends $20 million for reproductive services to include IVF for eligible service-connected, catastrophically disabled veterans whose injuries preclude their ability to conceive children, and $320 million for prosthetics and sensory aids to meet expected continued growth in expenditures in fiscal year 2020. Another specific funding request we feel is especially important to the success of VA's overall modernization efforts relates to information technology. For VA's Office of Information Technology, the IB recommends $6.1 billion, a $1 billion increase over FY 2019 to ensure VA has the ability to apply timely, effective, and efficient IT solutions to sustain essential operations in delivering benefits and health care to our nation's veterans. This includes $1.8 billion to sustain the Cerner electronic health record modernization efforts. We want to ensure that gaps are identified and addressed by VA's Clinical Work Group Council, so there is a seamless replacement of the existing EHR system. Our recommendation is about $200 million more than the administration's request and is not contingent on a $300 million carryover into fiscal year 2020. We have recommended an increase of $230 million to address a 40% reduction in IT development funding that has occurred since fiscal year 2014, which has hampered innovations in VA medical care and research. Our recommendations did not take into account VA's March 2019 reprogramming request of nearly $96 million to go towards IT projects for the VA Mission Act. We believe the gaps this request creates, $52 million for other IT development projects and $44 million from IT operations and maintenance, must be filled since IT is a vital part of virtually all of VA's business lines and reform efforts. Mr. Murray will continue with the IB recommendations for VA infrastructure and construction needs.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Elam. And Mr. Murray, your full testimony will be entered into the record, and you're recognized for 5 minutes to summarize your remarks.
Thank you. Madam Chairwoman, Mr. Ranking Member, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the capital infrastructure portion of the independent budget. For more than 100 years, the government's solution to provide health care for our military and veterans has been to build, manage, and maintain a network of hospitals across the nation. This model allows VA to deliver care to over 1,700 medical facilities, but it's left with more than 5,600 total buildings, 34,000 acres of land. Many of these are past their life cycle. Some of the facilities need to be replaced, some need to be disposed of, others need to be expanded, but all of them need to be currently maintained. The administration's 2020 request for VA's construction programs of $1.8 billion is a 44% reduction from 2019 funding levels. This is a disappointing step back in funding to maintain VA's aging infrastructure. Their long-range strategic capital investment plan, or SCIP, includes over 4,000 capital projects with an estimated cost between $62 and $76 billion, which includes activation costs. This is a massive backlog of projects. VA's 2020 budget request for major and minor construction is significantly below the true need stated by the Secretary and identified by the SCIP. At a time when VA is seeking to expand its capacity by hiring additional doctors, nurses, clinicians, and support staff, it's absolutely critical that VA continue to invest in the infrastructure necessary for them to care for veterans. Lower funding requests will never begin to work down the backlog and will only further grow this enormous list. While these funds will allow VA to begin construction on key projects, many other previously funded sites still lack the funding for completion. Some of these projects have been on hold or in the design and development phase for years. We ask that Congress authorize and appropriate additional funds so VA can begin to decrease the backlog and not simply add to it each year. Additionally, there are outstanding seismic corrections that must be addressed. Last year, VA was appropriated approximately $1.1 billion for seismic corrections alone. This year, VA requested considerably less. Seismic corrections could be life safety issues, and kicking that can down the road is completely unacceptable. At the current funding request from VA, it will take almost 17 years to remedy all the currently known seismic deficiencies. I personally wouldn't want to work in a building that I knew wasn't up to standards, and I'm sure no one else would either. It's also important to invest heavily in minor construction because these are the types of projects that can be completed faster and have a more immediate impact on services for veterans. Similar to minor construction, medical facility leasing authority needs to be reexamined. The delays in executing leases limit VA's ability to flexibly provide care around the country. Changing the leasing authority to allow the committees to authorize leases similar to the authority granted to GSA would help VA expedite its leasing process. We are pleased to see that VA has restarted its market assessments to better understand the needs of the patients and what care VA already has in place and where it might need to expand. The market assessments should provide vital information regarding what changes might need to be made, and we asked with the market assessments, along with all other services VA looks to address, the stakeholders are brought in to provide valuable information regarding care. Our collective members around the country have deep investments in the care provided and are ready, willing, and able to provide feedback and constructive input into these assessments. While not specifically covered in the independent budget, we do want to thank this subcommittee for your efforts to ensure the best possible outcomes for our brothers and sisters still wearing the uniform. What we've been told from our members and seen in all of our base visits regarding military housing is difficult to hear about, and we know this is something the subcommittee is doing its best to remedy as quickly as possible. We thank you for your oversight into issues like housing, and we ask you to keep military infrastructure and upgrades at the top of the subcommittee's priorities as well. Issues that may seem minor may have major impacts on service members. More daycare facilities, schools on bases may sound ancillary issues, but they have direct impacts on our service members and their families' day-to-day lives. We ask that you push for added emphasis on disaster relief and upgrades to bases recently struck by natural disasters. Bases like Offutt, Tyndall, and Lejeune, just to name a few, need serious repairs and upgrades to fix the problems they have and prevent the next natural disaster from wreaking such devastating damage. Madam Chairwoman, Mr. Ranking Member, on behalf of the independent budget, we'd like to thank you for the opportunity to discuss these critical issues. This concludes our testimony. We'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. I know Judge Carter and I both have another committee hearing that we have to get to. The one question that I have, frankly, Mr. Murray, is that the Mission Act is really a significant driver of our shortfall problem when it comes to the VA medical services, and we predicted that this would happen. That's why I voted against the Mission Act. So does the VFW support a fix to this issue? Because there is one, and it's going to be important for us to address this so that we don't have a 10-year cliff that the VA falls off of.
We support the Mission Act, but any specific fix that you're discussing?
Congresswoman Lowy had a fix that was opposed by the VSOs last year, both in the Senate and the House, and it was a bipartisan fix that would have addressed the discretionary, the volume of discretionary funds that would be consumed by the Mission Act needs. And it's something that we can still pursue and that there is bipartisan interest in continuing to pursue so that we don't face this shortfall issue over the next decade.
We're looking to make sure that the Mission Act is funded properly, that, like you said, we don't run into this cliff, and we're absolutely willing to keep that discussion going.
Okay, well, we should, because the funding issue is certainly, there's support there, but we've created a bottomless pit by moving the mandatory to the discretionary, and it's going to start to rob funding from other VA program, essential VA programs, which obviously none of us support. So we look forward to working with you on that. Judge Carter?
Well, I'm not going to get into the Mission Act. We know that we have a dispute over that. And I'm not going to get into it. But that backlog of construction projects that you pointed out is billions and billions and billions of dollars. And you're right. It's going to take a long time to get there. And that's the best, all I can say. Where are we going to get the funds to do that? I mean, that's when you decide you're going to have a hospital system around the world, you've got those kind of problems.
Absolutely.
We'll do the best we can, but we only got so much money.
I understand, sir. And while we always ask for, the additional funding, one of the issues with VA is that even if they were given all the money to complete that, they don't have the capacity to execute these contracts and complete these projects, that they're lacking the oversight and management in order to do that, even if you did, give them.
I'm going to argue with you on that issue. I've been very unhappy with the way they take care of their business at the VA. Since I've been associated with it, I think they're getting better in some areas, especially in healthcare. But I'm still one of the people that screamed bloody murder about this electronic health records that we put $1 billion in at least every year since I've been in Congress. And I've been in Congress long enough to build a lot of stuff with that money. And I don't see any solution, and that's just plain mismanagement, as far as I'm concerned.
And I'll add that they're not even spending all the money that we're appropriating and asking for another billion plus
Yeah,
more.
it's a bottomless pit of money, and they have accomplished nothing. And I came on this appropriation committee in '04. So add it up. It's been at least $1 billion every year, sometimes $2, $3 billion.
We're certainly hoping that the new House.
Your mic, please.
We're hoping that this new subcommittee in HVAC is going to really look at that oversight carefully, and every step of the way on the money that's been spent is so critical for the IT piece. It's integral into everything that VA does. So they're having one of their first hearings coming up. Actually, I think it's today. So we're going to be,
Well, we could talk ad nauseum about this, but the real world is there are people out in the private sector that have prayed in my office for 10 years telling me if they would just quit being old-fashioned, we could get it fixed for them.
Well, we did, as you know.
I don't want to get into that.
No. We don't need to, but that's one of the reasons that we inserted GAO into the process of the EHR implementation. And so that way they're going to, instead of having to go have them back clean up at the end when it's all messed up and over budget and over time, that hopefully they can help us ride herd on the process all the way through.
Absolutely.
So, thank you. Thank you very much for your service to our nation's veterans. We appreciate your commitment. And that concludes this morning's hearings. It concludes our hearing schedule prior to our markup of the bill once it's completed. I want to thank all the witnesses today, thank the members of the subcommittee for their hard work. And with that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.